Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. When Jesus had finished all his words to the people, he entered Capernaum. The centurion there had a slave who was ill and about to die, and he was valuable to him. When he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and save the life of his slave. So they approached Jesus and strongly urged him to come, saying, "He deserves to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he built this synagogue for us." Jesus went with them. But when he was only a short distance from the house, the centurion sent friends to tell him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you enter under my roof. Therefore I did not consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a person subject to authority, with soldiers subject to me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come here, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. Turning, he said to the crowd following him, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When the messengers returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today is the feast day of Saints Cornelius and Cyprian, who are both mentioned in the Eucharistic prayer, the Roman canon, Eucharistic prayer 1. When we say that at Mass, the Litany of the Saints, they are mentioned. Saint Cyprian is really, he's more well known than Saint Cornelius because Saint Cyprian is known for his theological contributions to the church. So when I was studying theology in college, I had a class on somebody called Saint John Henry Newman. Saint John Henry Newman, for whom the Newman Center at Wabash is named. One of his famous books that he wrote, actually the reason why he converted to Catholicism from being an Anglican, is he wrote a book called The Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine. The Development of Christian Doctrine. And it's important because when we think about the church, not everything that the church teaches is explicitly stated in the Bible. So how can we be confident in the things that the church teaches? What St. John Henry Newman famously says is that just as a tree was once a seed, and yet it's still that same seed, but it looks different, it grows and it develops. Just as rivers, they look different at different times in the stages of the river. They look different at the source from where they enter into the Gulf or wherever. And so it's the same way with Christianity, that the church in the very beginning was the seed. And over the centuries, the church continues to grow and develop. But its identity is the same, even though parts of it may look different or developed. And so in the early church especially, but even all throughout the history of the church, there are teachings of the church that grow and they develop. It's one of the reasons why we don't believe in sola scriptura as Catholics. We don't believe that everything that we believe has to be explicitly stated in the Bible. Perhaps most famously, our belief in the Trinity. Nowhere is it explicitly stated in the Bible. And so St. Cyprian was an important contributor to the development of church doctrine because St. Cyprian was a bishop of Carthage, and it was during the time of a terrible persecution. It was persecution under the Emperor Decius. And one of the things that happened in the persecution is that there were many Christians, and including bishops and priests, who basically apostatized from the faith when they were threatened with persecution. And when the persecution ended, of course, all these people wanted to be welcomed back into the communion of the church. And there were some people called the rigorists who basically said that those people, since they had apostatized publicly, they shouldn't be allowed back in the church, and certainly not as a priest or a bishop for those who apostatized. And there was a great debate about this. And one of the things that came from this was that St. Cyprian was one of the main speakers, and he actually, at one point, he had a terrible disagreement with the Pope and was essentially excommunicated for a little while. And eventually, he ended up recanting and came back into communion with Rome and the Pope. But the point is that St. Cyprian was still a saint, and so is the Pope of that time. People who were legitimately saintly people, they had to wrestle with this question. And that's what happens when church doctrine develops. There are multiple valid points of view, and there has to be a discussion and debate until eventually the conclusion is reached. This is the development of church doctrine. It's not that the doctrine changes, it's that what was implicitly taught by Jesus in the early days of the church, it needs to be spelled out more in detail. And we call that the development of doctrine. Another thing I think is really interesting about St. Cyprian is that one of his famous quotes that I think is very relevant for us today, he says that no one can call God his Father without calling the church his mother. No one can call God his Father without calling the church his mother. And obviously, I think that's very significant for us. There's so many Christians who they want to call God their Father, but they don't see the need to be within the church. That was never the teaching of the early Christians. And one of the things St. Cyprian would tell people who were getting too involved in this debate, and they were starting to have opinions so strong that it was making them want to separate themselves from communion with the church. Nobody can call God his Father without calling the church his mother.